Xianxia's eyelids twitched when he witnessed this scene because the might of the lightning wasn't inferior to a bolt of divine lightning of obliteration. Are you kidding me? It was just a few words. Yet you sent a bolt of divine lightning of obliteration at me? Xianxia couldn't help but curse. Stop talking and run. Lu Wanner grabbed his hand when she noticed that he wasn't done cursing. And then she waved her hand and transformed into a ray of light that vanished along with Xianxia. Bang! Xianxia and Lu Wanner had just left when the mountain they were on was instantly transformed into powder by the lightning. Xianxia's heart couldn't help but thump swiftly when he witnessed this scene from afar. He could destroy the bolt of lighting if he used his full strength, but he would definitely suffer an injury. Of course, he hadn't expected that the heavens would actually send a bolt of lightning down against him just because of something he'd said. The heaven Tao of the radiant dimension possesses intelligence of its own, and it'll instinctively send down its wrath upon those who disrespect it. Lu Wanner spoke solemnly. Of course, it would definitely disdain to pay any attention to an ordinary person. But you're different. Not only have you attained the monarch realm, you might even possess something that arouses fear in it. So that was why it sent its divine punishment down towards you. In short, you should mind your tongue in the future. Xianxia felt speechless. Meanwhile, 3 rays of light shot through the sky, and then Taoist Gu and 2 more saints appeared before Xianxia and Lu Wanner. Taoist Gu and the others were stunned when they saw Xianxia and Lu Wanner, and then they revealed quite unusual expressions. Because Xianxia and Lu Wanner's hands were still held together. Good. Very good. Taoist Gu grinned. Xianxia, I'm telling you right now, you better not let her down. Otherwise, I won't forgive you. The other 2 saints hurriedly nodded as well to display their agreement. It would definitely be great news for the ancient sword school if Xianxia and Lu Wanner got together, and it was something they were happy to see, because they could avoid internal strife that way. After all, there was no place for 2 tigers on one mountain. It was fine when there was a single genius, but internal strife might arise if there were 2 geniuses. If Xianxia had Lu Wanner fought each other, then the consequences would really be unimaginable. Yet now, if they were to be together, then how could they possibly engage in any internal strife? Even if they fought, it would be a fight between family. Lu Wanner blushed a little when she heard them, and then she released Xianxia's hand and said, I'll come look for you at another time. She immediately transformed into a ray of light and vanished into the horizon. Kid, you're really not bad. Taoist Gu walked over to Xianxia and smiled. While that little girl seems amiable and easy to approach on the surface, she's actually extremely proud in her heart. I never expected that you would actually be able to capture her heart. You really aren't simple. Ha ha ha. Xianxia laughed bitterly, but he didn't explain it because the more he did, the more troublesome it would become. Taoist Gu laughed for a while before he said, Kid, you got a dragon, right? Xianxia nodded, and then he waved his right hand and brought out both the Herculean sword and the dragon. Taoist Gu glanced at the dragon and said, It is quite suitable to be refined as an equipment spirit. But if that is done, then not only will your sword become stronger, it will become heavier as well. Will you be able to swing it? Xianxia nodded. That's not a problem. I can deal with that. Taoist Gu nodded. All right, let's return to the sword school. As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand and they vanished on the spot. The ancient sword school. Besides the 9 peaks of the ancient sword school, it had a headquarters as well, and it was called the Ancient Sword Peak. Taoist Gu and the others didn't take Xianxia to Heavenly Sword Peak but the Ancient Sword Peak instead. Xianxia couldn't avoid feeling shocked when he arrived here, because a dense expanse of swords were floating throughout the sky and all around Ancient Sword Peak. Every single sword was at the Tao rank at least. While there were many swords here, they didn't seem disorderly at all, and they were circling around the mountain in a strange manner. At the center of these swords, which was also the top of Ancient Sword Peak, was an extremely long sword that floated there. The sword was at least 2 times longer than an ordinary sword, and it was completely dark blue and without a hilt. What a sword! There was a trace of burning desire in Xianxia's eyes when he saw the sword. While he hadn't grabbed it in his hand, his intuition told him that it was a good sword. Or perhaps it should be said to be the best sword he's seen besides the sword precursor. Taoist Gu explained, its name is Magnetron, and it's a low-grade divine rank sword. Its blade was made from a mysterious metal from outer space, and it possesses extremely stronger magnetism. Any weapon that comes into contact with it will become stuck to it. Moreover, it has the ability to shatter objects. If anything at a lower quality were to collide with it, then it would be instantly shattered into powder. It's ranked at the 3rd position amongst the 10 famous swords of our ancient sword school. Xianxia suddenly said, "Can I have it?" Taoist Gu was slightly stunned, and then said, "That won't do. See those swords in the surroundings, they are actually part of a sword formation, and that sword is the core of the formation. Those swords in the surroundings are only able to float in the air because of it. However, it's not impossible as well, because it possesses intelligence of its own. The sword master wouldn't object if it's willing to go with you." Xianxia asked, "How do I make it leave with me?" Taoist Gu shook his head. "I don't know. Don't look at me like that. I really don't. It wouldn't be acting like a piece of decoration here if I did." Xianxia had a strange smile on the corners of his mouth. "I'll come for it once I can access the primordial pagoda." Natural treasures and treasures with consciousnesses of their own were very much attracted to the primordial pagoda, so wouldn't it be easy for him to obtain that sword once the primordial pagoda had returned to its previous state? "Come, let's head to the sword hall. It's time for you to meet our sword master," said Taoist Gu. As soon as Taoist Gu finished speaking, Xianxia felt the scene before his eyes warp, and then he appeared within a hall. There were around 10 people standing on each side of the hall, and a middle-aged man in a robe that was a mix of white and green sat at the seat of the host. Besides that, there was a black-robed old man and gray-robed old man standing on his sides. The weakest amongst the people here was at the high-rank half-saint realm, and there were 6 saints here. All of their gazes were on Xianxia, and a long time passed before the middle-aged man said, "Not bad. He really is a genius in the sword Dao." The other experts nodded slightly. "He's too stubborn, and those who are incapable of being flexible usually die earlier," the black-robed old man on the left of the middle-aged man continued. "You have to work on your temper, or it'll be very easy for you to die prematurely." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "Kid, do you know how severe it was when you suddenly headed to the Dao Order? Even the slightest action may affect the entire whole." All the experts at the high-rank half-saint realm and above of the sword school had set out because of you, and it wasn't just us. Even the founding ancestor descended to this world for you. When he spoke up to this point, there was a solemn expression in his eyes. If a war were to have erupted between the Dao Order and our sword school, can you imagine how many would die? I'm not telling you all of this because I'm trying to put the blame on you. You challenged the Dao Order, defeated all its geniuses, and brought great honor and glory to my sword school. Every disciple of the sword school is filled with pride and glory right now. However, did you ever consider how you might die doing that? Planning before action is always a beautiful daydream," Xianxia continued. "The Dao Order was trying to step all over me, so wouldn't I be worthless if I didn't fight back? He's definitely one capable of causing a huge amount of trouble." The black-robed old man on the middle-aged man's left spoke once more. "I think he's right," the gray-robed old man on the middle-aged man's right said. "Men should be a little wild sometimes, and they shouldn't shrink back when they should take action." Xianxia glanced at the gray-robed old man when he heard this, and he had a much better impression of the old man. The black-robed old man glanced at the gray-robed old man and said, "I hope you'll still be able to say the same when he brings down terrible calamity upon our sword school." The gray-robed old man spoke indifferently. "Does our sword school have to fear anyone in Pine Prefecture?" All right, the middle-aged man said. "Elder Xiao, Elder Lin, it's a rare occasion for both of you to emerge from your closed-door cultivations, so don't argue over such a trivial matter. Now, both of you've met him, so you should go back to cultivating. I'll ask for both of your assistance again when there's trouble." Both of them exchanged glances, grunted coldly, and then vanished on the spot. Once the 2 old men left, the middle-aged man's gaze descended onto Xianxia, and a long time passed before he said, "You performed meritorious service this time, so my sword school can't treat you shabbily. I won't try to give you swords or sword chests because you wouldn't even want them when you have your master to forge them for you. How about this? I heard that you're fond of wealth, so I'll give you 1,000,000 extreme-grade energy stones. Right, you can cultivate for 3 days in the Pagoda of Sword Intent for free as well." The others here were stunned when they heard this, and then their gazes carried a trace of envy when they gazed at Xianxia again. "Quickly thank the sword master." Taoist Gu slapped Xianxia on the head while happiness covered his face. "Isn't it just 1,000,000 energy stones?" Xianxia puckered his lips. He had a few million with him now, and he could be said to be very wealthy. Taoist Gu scolded with a smile on his face. "You know nothing. The Pagoda of Sword Intent is the most invaluable place in our sword school. While all of the old fellows here have no need for it, it's a paradise for all of you juniors. Especially you. Do you know that you must enter the Pagoda of Sword Intent to recover your sword intent? It can restore my sword intent?" Xianxia was instantly overjoyed, and then he bowed slightly to the middle-aged man. "Thank you. As a sword cultivation, how can you have no sword intent? Go on." The middle-aged man smiled. After that, Taoist Gu led Xianxia to the Pagoda of Sword Intent. The Pagoda of Sword Intent wasn't very large or tall. It was just around 10 m tall and 6 m wide. Moreover, there was nothing special about it when judged by its outward appearance alone. Taoist Gu had a slightly complicated expression in his eyes as he looked at the pagoda. Do you know why it's called the Pagoda of Sword Intent? Because the sword intent that the past experts of our ancient sword school left behind are stored in there. Xianxia frowned slightly. Sword intent left behind by the past experts of the sword school? Taoist Gu nodded. While we've attained the Saint Realm, it doesn't represent that we can live forever. Conversely, we have to experience the wrath of the heavens every 100 years upon attaining the Saint Realm. If we're able to survive, then we would naturally be able to live for 100 years more. But if we fail, then only death would await us. Only after attaining the Saint Realm do you really start to fight for survival with the heavens. In other words, the Saint Realm is only the beginning of the path to eternal life. The Saint Realm is only the beginning. Xianxia's brows knit tightly together. If the Saint Realm is just the beginning, then what about me? I've gone too far off topic. Taoist Gu shook his head, and his gaze descended once more upon the pagoda. The strands of sword intent within the pagoda were left behind by the seniors of our sword school who were about to fall. They didn't just leave their sword intent behind, they left behind their respective daos within the sword intent. Not only them, even we will leave our sword intent behind as well when it's our time to die. Xianxia suddenly asked, "Can I devour the sword intent in there?" Taoist Gu glanced at him and grinned. "If you have the ability, then please don't hold back. Remember what you've said." Xianxia was delighted, because sword intent could be devoured to strengthen one's own sword intent. Since the sword intent of the seniors of the ancient sword school were stored within the pagoda, one could only imagine how pure they would be. Taoist Gu roared with laughter, and he laughed for a short while before he said, "Kid, once you see the situation in there, you'll realize how naive you were." After that, he restrained his smile and spoke seriously. The baleful energy and malicious energy within the sword intent have been eliminated, but they are still extremely sharp and fierce. Don't offend those especially powerful strands of sword intent once you get in there. You can start from the weak strands of sword intent and rely on them to slowly restore your sword intent. Xianxia asked, "I can do that?" Taoist Gu nodded and said, "Lu Wanner's sword intent was improved here as well. But it should be much easier for you because you used to possess 3rd-level heaven rank sword intent in the past. So you don't have to worry about your mental state being unable to keep up. However, whether you're able to succeed in restoring it to the 3rd level of the heaven rank will depend on your fortune." Xianxia suddenly asked, "What lies above the 3rd level of the heaven rank?" Now, he was naturally clearly aware that the 3rd level of the heaven rank wasn't the highest level of sword intent, or it should be said that sword intent was just like realms of cultivation, and they were both endless. The void rank. There was a trace of yearning in Taoist Gu's eyes. After you attain perfection in the heaven rank, you'll attain the void rank next. When he spoke up to this point, he flicked with his finger, and that strand of sword intent appeared before Yang Yi. While it had fused into the space before him, Yang Yi was still able to sense it. Taoist Gu continued, "See? Sword intent that has attained perfection in the heaven rank still leaves traces behind. Since there are traces, it represents that it has flaws. However, void rank sword intent leaves no traces behind. It truly merges into one with the world. No, it should be said to have transcended the world and doesn't exist within the 5 elements. Not only is such sword intent more than 10 times stronger than heaven rank sword intent, it's extremely mysterious and is truly capable of killing without leaving a trace behind. Let me simplify it. If you possess void rank sword intent right now, then killing a high rank half-saint might be as easy as blowing off dust to you. I'm talking about relying solely on your sword intent to kill a high rank half-saint. I'll be able to kill a high rank half-saint with just my sword intent?" Yang Yi was visibly moved. If he wanted to kill a high rank half-saint now, then he would definitely have to use all his trump cards like the sword domain and the laws. Only then would he have a chance at killing a high rank half-saint. But if the high rank half-saint refused to fight him and chose to flee instead, then he would have no chance to kill that person at all. But if he had void rank sword intent, then it would be as easy as blowing off dust. How strong is void rank sword intent? Are the 2 strands of sword intent in my mind at the void rank? Yang Yi thought for a moment and felt that they probably weren't at the void rank. After all, if they were at the void rank, then it would have been absolutely impossible for him to devour a strand that day. But he had no doubt that the Sword Sect's founding ancestor's sword intent definitely surpassed the 3rd level of the heaven rank. Taoist Gu smiled as he said, "Go on in. I'll forge that sword and sword chest for you. I hope you'll be able to succeed." In that way, the younger generation of our ancient sword school would have 2 disciples who possess 3rd level heaven rank sword intent. I hope so. Yang Ye's figure flashed into the pagoda once he finished speaking. There was a strange smile on the corners of Taoist Gu's mouth when he saw Yang Yi enter the pagoda. That kid needs to suffer a little. He. After he entered the pagoda, a strand of powerful pressure instantly smashed down upon him and caught him off guard. It almost brought him to his knees. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and forcefully stopped himself when his knees were just around 20 centimeters away from the ground. Even though he hadn't been brought down to his knees, the pressure upon him was like a myriad of mountains, and it caused the bones throughout his body to crack. In less than 2 breaths of time, Yang Ye's face was covered in cold sweat while veins had popped up on his forehead. He seemed very scary. Yang Yi forcefully endured it and stopped himself from kneeling, because he knew that once he did kneel, then his will would collapse instantaneously. If his will collapsed, then how would he fight the sword intent here? However, the pressure he experienced was growing stronger and stronger. Even his body, which was comparable to a half-saint, couldn't resist the pressure, and the only reason he was still able to hold on was because he was relying on his willpower. Just like that, time slowly trickled by. Yang Yi didn't know how long had passed, but he felt that his consciousness had started to become slightly blurry. This made him bite his tongue without end and use the sharp pain he experienced to keep himself awake. Bang! Suddenly, a strand of sword intent surged out from within Yang Yi. 2nd level sword intent. Yang Yi was delighted. He hadn't expected that his sword intent would actually undergo such a transformation while suffering such pressure. Persist. I must persist. Yang Yi gritted his teeth. While his body had bent down completely and his knees were almost touching the floor, his face was covered in determination. Even though he joined the ancient sword school now, he was very clearly aware that he could only rely on himself because only his own strength would be there for him until the end. He was at the monarch realm now, so his cultivation wasn't much inferior to the cultivation he once possessed on Profounder Continent. If his sword intent was restored, then his strength could be said to have been completely restored. However, that little bit of strength was utterly insufficient in Pine Prefecture. Because there were saints here. It wasn't like Profounder Continent where the strongest existences were at the high-rank half-saint realm. Time passed slowly, and almost 6 hours had passed by now. Bang! A strand of sword intent surged out from within Yang Yi. It was third-level sword intent. His sword intent had improved by another level to attain the third level under the pressure he experienced here. However, this process wasn't fun for Yang Yi at all. It felt like a myriad of mountains pressing down upon him, and it truly made both his mind and body feel like they were on the verge of collapse. At this moment, Yang Yi finally understood that this was the method Taoist Gu and the others were speaking about when it came to restoring his sword intent. Just like that, Yang Yi persisted bitterly, and his sword intent rose incessantly as well. 3 days later, his sword intent had attained the 9th level. After he attained the 9th level, the pressure he experienced grew even stronger instead, and his knees were less than 10 centimeters away from the ground. Yang Yi couldn't help but howl while a ferocious covered his face. Moreover, his veins had popped up all over his face. That day, Taoist Gu had said that he might have to suffer a little to recover his sword intent, and he'd been indifferent towards that suffering, because what suffering had he not experienced in the past? Yet now he had to say that it really was painful. The pressure didn't just press down upon his body, it pressed down upon his will as well. Or it should be said that the pressure was actually targeted at his will. For days later, bang! A strand of sword intent swept out from him again, and then Yang Yi instantly felt his body feel lighter, because he'd attained the first level of heaven rank sword intent. However, pressure that was 2 times more terrifying than before suddenly descended upon him once more, and his sword intent was instantly shattered by the pressure. Pooh! Yang Yi was caught off guard, and a mouthful of blood sprayed out from between his lips while he almost fell flat on the ground. Yang Yi supported himself up with both hands, and his body was like the shape of a bow right now. He raised his head to glance at the surroundings yet noticed that it was completely empty. However, he could sense that all sorts of sword intent filled the surroundings, and the weakest amongst them was at the 3rd level of the heaven rank. That was why his sword intent wasn't able to resist them at all. How annoying. Just you wait. Yang Yi gritted his teeth. Crack. As soon as he finished speaking, the pressure he experienced grew even stronger, and the bones throughout his body started to crack incessantly. As if they were replying to Yang Ye's provocation, the sword intent in the surroundings even started gathering around Yang Yi, and then they slowly descended down towards him as if they wanted to make him lie completely flat on the ground. That's enough. You're trying to bully me with numbers? Just watch how I crush all of you. As soon as he finished speaking, the 2 strands of sword intent from the unfettered one flashed out from the center of his forehead. Bang! As soon as those 2 strands of sword intent appeared here, an explosion instantly resounded. As soon as those 2 strands of sword intent from the sword sect's founding ancestor emerged from within him, Yang Ye's body immediately felt lighter as the pressure upon him withdrew like a receding tide. Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief. Actually, he could have released the unfettered one's sword intent in the beginning, but he hadn't, because he knew that while the sword intent in the surroundings were exerting pressure upon him, it was extremely beneficial to him. Yet now, they weren't just exerting pressure on him, they wanted to crush him. Yang Yi slowly closed his eyes because the sword intent around him couldn't only be sensed and not seen. So he focused and cleared his mind. Yang Ye's expression gradually grew solemn because sword intent covered the surroundings, and every single strand was at the 3rd level of the heaven rank at least. Moreover, there were 2 obscure strands of sword intent amongst them. He could only faintly sense that those 2 strands of sword intent were very powerful, and they weren't weaker to the unfettered one's sword intent. However, they seemed to be completely disinterested in him, so they were quite far away from him. As for the sword intent around him, they were eyeing him with hostility. However, they feared the unfettered one's sword intent, so they didn't approach him. Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment before he withdrew a strand of the unfettered one's sword intent. As soon as it vanished, the sword intent in the surroundings instantly seemed to be eager to pounce on Yang Yi, and they gradually started to approach him from all directions. Just as Taoist Gu had said, they didn't contain any baleful energy or killing intent, so they didn't attack Yang Yi, and they just relied on the fierce and sharp intent within them to exert pressure upon Yang Yi. The pressure grew stronger and stronger, And it didn't take long for Xianxia's bones to start cracking once more. Outside the pagoda of sword intent, Lu Wanner and the sword master of the ancient sword school, Jian Wuchen, were standing there, and a trace of worry could be seen in Lu Wanner's eyes. Lu Wanner asked, "Master, will he really be fine when you let him go in there without a protection token?" Jian Wuchen shook his head and said, "He's unlike anyone else. Just the strength of his body is sufficient for him to persist in there. Moreover, his sword intent dropped because he utilized a secret technique, so it would be utterly impossible for him to recover it in a short period of time without utilizing such methods to stimulate the core of the sword intent within him." Lu Wanner spoke softly. "I know, but he might not be able to persist until his sword intent is restored to the 3rd level of the heaven rank." Jian Wuchen grinned. "His willpower far surpasses ordinary people, or I should say that it's stronger than yours. So long as he doesn't annoy the sword intent in there, then it shouldn't be a problem for him to hold on for around half a month." Lu Wanner said, "Didn't you only allow him to cultivate there for 3 days?" Jian Wuchen said, "That was just for others to hear. After all, if others were to find out that he was allowed to cultivate there for so long, then I can only imagine how many would be envious. So, I had no choice but to say that in order to help that kid avoid some trouble." Lu Wanner nodded, and then she spoke abruptly. "What if he infuriates those strands of sword intent?" Jian Wuchen spoke softly. "Then I can only wish him good luck." Lu Wanner was at a loss for words. 5 days later, Xianxia had attained the 2nd level of heaven rank sword intent under the pressure exerted upon him from the sword intent in the surroundings. After he attained the 2nd level of heaven rank sword intent, Xianxia withdrew the unfettered one sword intent and relied on his own sword intent to resist the sword intent in the surroundings. While he was only at the 2nd level of the heaven rank, his sword intent had been slaughter sword intent in the past, so it was much stronger than other forms of sword intent. Thus, he was barely able to resist the might of the sword intent in the surroundings. Of course, while he could resist it, he had to endure a huge amount of pressure. After all, the sword intent in the surroundings weren't inferior to his own, and they far surpassed him in numbers. However, that was exactly what he desired. 10 days passed just like that. Bang! Suddenly, a strand of terrifying sword intent swept out from within him. As soon as it had, the sword intent in the surroundings immediately moved backwards repeatedly. But it didn't take long for them to press down upon him once more. "I'm finally at the 3rd level." Xianxia took a deep breath while a trace of excitement appeared in his eyes. The recovery of his sword intent represented that he was even confident in his ability to kill high-rank half-saints now. After all, 3rd level heaven rank sword intent could merge into space. Coupled with the decay laws that he possessed, it really wasn't difficult for him to kill a high-rank half-saint if he took that half-saint by surprise. After all, even high-rank half-saints couldn't resist the decay laws he possessed. Once the excitement passed, Xianxia's gaze swept through the surroundings, while a trace of madness appeared within his eyes. There were at least a few thousand types of sword intent here, and if he were to devour them all, then perhaps he could attain void rank sword intent. If it were an ordinary person or even Lu Wanner in his position, that person would definitely not dare to do that. Because there were so many types of sword intent here, so if they were infuriated and swarmed a person, then not to mention them, even a high-rank half-saint would probably be crushed alive. However, Xianxia didn't want to give up because he might not have another chance. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings, and it didn't take long for him to sense a comparatively weaker strand of sword intent. He didn't hesitate to send his sword intent pouncing at that strand of sword intent. As soon as he did that, the situation here instantly became heated as all the other sword intent in the surroundings suddenly pounced at him as well. Xianxia's face turned grim because he hadn't expected them to actually be so united. He hurriedly withdrew the unfettered one's sword intent, and the sword intent in the surroundings stopped moving for now. But it didn't take long for Xianxia's expression to change once more, because 2 strands of sword intent which weren't inferior to the unfettered one's sword intent had started approaching him. Moreover, the other strands of sword intent started to move under the lead of those 2 strands of sword intent. A cold glow flashed through Xianxia's eyes as he took a step forward and activated the sword domain. As soon as he did that, the sword intent around him immediately stopped moving but became even more irritated. Xianxia sensed their emotions for a moment, and then he said, "Do all of you want to stay here forever?" He knew that even if he used the sword domain and those two strands of the unfettered one's sword intent, it would still be impossible for him to devour the sword intent here. Because they were clearly very united and seemed to reject him, the only way was to make them willingly merge with his sword intent. While it wasn't very realistic, he still wanted to give it a try. Xianxia took a deep breath and continued, "Do all of you wish to stay here and be unable to see the light of day forever? Do you wish to just vanish one day? Every single one of your past masters were peerless experts who commanded great strength and authority. While they've fallen, don't you want your past masters to continue commanding great strength and authority in a different manner?" When he spoke up to this point, Xianxia's voice became heavier. "All of you are like plants without roots, and once sword intent that possess no roots vanish, it'll vanish forever. Do all of you want to vanish forever?" Xianxia was able to sense that some of the sword intent in the surroundings were gradually calming down. Such a chance delighted Xianxia, and he quickly continued, "The only way for all of you to leave this place is to merge with my sword intent. Because if you don't, then they'll never let all of you leave. Even if you can leave, all of you'll be truly gone once you're destroyed in the outside world. So all of you have to merge with my sword intent and become a part of me. Only then can all of you leave, and you wouldn't have to worry about being destroyed as well." Xianxia was very clearly aware that while it didn't affect these strands of sword intent in the beginning, they would definitely be unwilling to continue staying here after being trapped for such a long time. These sword intents had consciousnesses of their own. Perhaps it wasn't true intelligence, but they definitely had a consciousness. So long as they yearned to head out into the outside world, then he naturally had a chance. A long moment of silence ensued before a strand of sword intent suddenly entered Xianxia's sword intent, which covered the area before him, and it merged into his sword intent. As soon as that strand of sword intent merged with his sword intent, another shot into his sword intent as well. After that, strand after strand of sword intent surged incessantly into Xianxia's sword intent. Just as he'd said, most of these strands of sword intent had been trapped here for too long. It would be fine if they didn't possess any intelligence at all, but the problem was that most of them had a certain amount of intelligence. So, how could they be willing to stay here forever? Of course, the reason many had chosen to merge with Xianxia's sword intent was because they thought highly of Xianxia's strength. Actually, even if an ordinary disciple of the ancient sword school could merge with these strands of sword intent, that disciple would definitely not dare to do so. Because these strands of sword intent were a precious treasure of the sword school, and many disciples of the sword school used them to temper their own sword intent. If someone were to merge with the sword intent here, then the higher-ups of the sword school would definitely skin that person alive. As for Xianxia, he'd never thought about that. In any case, all he knew was that Taoist Gu had said that he could do it if he had the ability, and he didn't care about anything else. Fewer and fewer strands of sword intent remained here while Xianxia's own sword intent was growing stronger and stronger. However, it wasn't so easy to merge with them because they more or less carried the wills of their former masters, and that was a huge point of conflict within Xianxia. Fortunately, he possessed the enlightened sword heart, and his will was extremely strong. So, he resisted and eliminated all of them. A day passed by just like that. Less than 10 strands of sword intent remained here, and Xianxia's sword intent had arrived at a terrifying state. It was at the peak of the heaven rank, the true peak of the heaven rank. Xianxia took a deep breath while his consciousness locked onto the last 10 strands of sword intent which remained here. They were undoubtedly the strongest amongst all the sword intent here. Xianxia spoke solemnly. "I will definitely bring honor to all of you if you come with me." Only silence remained in the surroundings, and those 10 strands of sword intent didn't move at all. Xianxia remained silent for an instant, and then he turned around and walked towards the exit. Right when he was about to pass through the exit, those 10 strands of sword intent shot into him. Bang! A terrifying aura swept out from Xianxia's body, and then the entire pagoda of sword intent crumbled apart. Jian Wuchen and Daoist Gu appeared before Yang Yi at the exact same instant that the pagoda of sword intent crumbled, and both of their faces were extremely unsightly when they saw the situation here. Both of their gazes immediately descended onto Yang Yi, and there was anger, bewilderment, and shock in their eyes. Countless different types of sword intent were devouring each other all around and within Yang Ye's body. While they seemed to have merged willingly with his sword intent, it was still a fierce battle when they started devouring each other. After all, the consciousness of the one which persisted until the end would definitely hold authority over the others. Of course, Yang Yi was still the one who benefited in the end. Daoist Gu spoke solemnly. He really is devouring them, Jian Wuchen asked. You let him do that? Daoist Gu laughed bitterly and said. He asked me if he could devour the sword intent within the pagoda, and I told him that he could feel free to do as he pleased if he had the ability. I'm sure you're aware that all the sword intent within the pagoda are at the 3rd level of the heaven rank at least, so they weren't inferior to his sword intent during its peak. Not to mention him, it wouldn't even be likely for me to be able to devour the sword intent within the pagoda. But I never imagined that he actually did it, and he seems to have even succeeded. When he spoke up to this point, Daoist Gu suddenly said, Swordmaster, if he really attains void rank sword intent, then coupled with Wanner, our ancient sword school will definitely be able to ascend to the top 30 within the martial rankings of the Central Divine Prefecture. Not to mention that we might be able to rely on that to ascend into the ranks of diamond rank powers. Jian Wuchen's eyelids twitched a little. After all, ascending to the ranks of diamond rank powers was something that generations of ancestors of the ancient sword school had fought to accomplish. A short while passed before Jian Wuchen shook his head and said, You should be aware that it isn't so easy to attain void rank sword intent, and it's impossible even if he devours all the heaven rank sword intent here. Otherwise, our sword school seniors would have devoured the sword intent here a very long time ago. Besides that, the martial rankings aren't as simple as you think. In short, we should first think of a way to explain this to those old fellows. The pagoda of sword intent have been absorbed, and the pagoda itself has crumbled. Even I, the sword master, might have to suffer for this. Daoist Gu smiled with embarrassment and said, Sword master, you must be joking. Besides the founding ancestor, you're the strongest in our sword school, so how could they dare to blame and punish you? They would just nag you at most. Jian Wuchen gazed at Yang Yi for a long time before he spoke softly. I wonder if his arrival in our sword sect is a blessing or a calamity to us? A solemn expression appeared on Daoist Gu's face as well. Needless to say, while Yang Ye's strength was formidable, his ability to cause trouble was absolutely formidable as well. Moreover, Yang Yi acted too willfully and domineeringly. It was fine if no one offended him, but if someone did, then he would definitely kill that person. Such a character was beneficial in the sense that he wouldn't be bullied. But the disadvantage was that it made it easy for Yang Yi to make enemies. Daoist Gu sighed softly as he gazed at Yang Yi, and there was a slightly complicated gaze in his eyes. A long time passed before the sword intent around Yang Yi gradually calmed down, and then around another hour passed before Yang Yi suddenly opened his eyes. He pressed his fingers together and waved them lightly towards. As soon as he finished the swing, the ground in the distance was immediately split apart and a bottomless and pitch-black rift appeared there. Jian Wuchen spoke abruptly, Quasi-void rank. Yang Ye's brows knit slightly together. It isn't true void rank sword intent? Be happy with what you have. Jian Wuchen continued. Do you know that besides the founding ancestor and a few monstrous geniuses of our sword school, even all of us only possess 3rd level heaven rank sword intent? Even though there's a difference in strength between 3rd level heaven rank sword intent, our sword intent is still only at the heaven rank in the end. Yet you have attained quasi-void rank sword intent while only around the age of 20. To be honest, even I feel quite envious. Yang Yi smiled with embarrassment and said, Isn't void rank sword intent completely soundless? My sword intent doesn't make a sound as well right now, so why is it only quasi-void rank and not the actual void rank? Because your sword intent hasn't truly surpassed this world. Daoist Gu continued. Your current sword intent can only be considered to be on par with the world at most. So, its traces can still be found in the world. Of course, ordinary people would be absolutely unable to detect it, unless they were geniuses who'd started comprehending the world or were high-rank half-saints who were half a step away from the saint realm. In short, if they haven't started comprehending the world or are below the saint realm, then even high-rank half-saints wouldn't be able to detect your sword intent. Xianxia asked, "How do I attain true void rank sword intent?" Both Daoist Gu and Jian Wuchen revealed solemn expressions when they heard this. And then Daoist Gu spoke seriously, "Kid, you must remember to never reach beyond your grasp. It's never beneficial to be hasty in your cultivation." Xianxia nodded and said, "Thank you for the guidance." Actually, he regretted speaking those words once he finished speaking them. Actually, he'd spoken in a moment of excitement, or it should be said that he was too anxious and impatient. Jian Wuchen and Daoist Gu's expressions eased up when they saw Xianxia's attitude towards the matter, and Jian Wuchen said, "True void rank sword intent is ethereal and otherworldly. Very few people are able to rely on external forces to attain the void rank. At the very least, I've never seen or heard of anyone succeeding. You can only rely on your own comprehension to attain the void rank. If you comprehend it, then you'll naturally attain the void rank." Xianxia said, "Has there been no one in our sword school besides the founding ancestor that has attained the void rank?" Jian Wuchen nodded and said, "There are some at the quasi-void rank, but there aren't many." Xianxia nodded, and then he suddenly asked, "Can I rely on quasi-void rank sword intent to fight Saint Realm experts?" Daoist Gu and Jian Wuchen exchanged glances, and there was a smile on both their faces. Daoist Gu had a grin on his face as he said, "Come, why don't you try an attack of mine?" "All right." There was blazing battle intent in Xianxia's eyes. His sword intent had been restored and even improved, so he really wanted to find someone to spar with. Daoist Gu flicked with his finger, and a strand of sword energy shot forward. It wasn't very quick, but Xianxia didn't dare act carelessly in the slightest. His profound energy surged madly before his sword intent shot out as well. In the end, he pressed his index and middle finger together before waving it forward, and a strand of sword energy shot forward and collided with Daoist Gu's sword energy. Hiss! Xianxia watched with astonishment as his sword energy was immediately blasted into bits, and then Daoist Gu's sword energy smashed against his chest. Bang! Xianxia's ground scraped against the ground as his figure was pushed back by the force, and his figure had moved backwards by almost 6 kilometers before it finally stopped. How strong! Xianxia raised his head to gaze at Daoist Gu while an extremely serious expression remained in his eyes. "What's the Saint Realm?" Daoist Gu continued. "The Saint Realm surpasses the restraints of the world, surpasses the laws, and is capable of using the energy of the world. There are some geniuses who can fight saints while at the high rank of the half-saint realm, but I've never seen a genius capable of fighting a saint at the monarch realm. Perhaps there are some in the central divine prefecture, but there are probably none in our Pine prefecture. I'm still quite weak." Xianxia took a deep breath. He'd thought that since he'd attained quasi-void rank sword intent, then even if he wasn't a match for saints, he could at least exchange a few blows with a saint. However, the cruel facts before him told him that he couldn't even resist a single move. However, the young hall master of Sky Divine Hall was a high-rank half-saint who was rumored to have fought a saint. So, Xianxia had no hope of victory in a battle against that fellow. If the sword spirit was awake, then he could fight desperately and execute the true form of Heavenrend. Perhaps he would be able to win then. However, the problem was that the sword spirit was still unconscious. Moreover, even if she woke up, he really didn't want to execute the true form of Heavenrend again. Because it didn't just cause huge harm to his own body, it was very harmful to the primordial pagoda and sword spirit as well. But if he didn't utilize the true form of Heavenrend, then how would he fight the young hall master of Sky Divine Hall? Or to be more precise, how would he fight the entire Sky Divine Hall? Daoist Gu suddenly chuckled. "Kid, you haven't suffered a blow to your confidence, right?" Xianxia restrained his thoughts and shook his head. "I'm still too weak." Daoist Gu said, "That depends on who you're comparing yourself to. If it's the younger generation, then no more than 10 throughout Pine Prefecture are capable of defeating you. However, if it's against us, to be honest, your strength isn't enough at all. Not to mention us, you're not even a match for some very old high-rank half-saints. I have to work harder, said Yang Yi. Regardless of whether it was Lu Wan'er, Qing Daofu, or the young hall master of Sky Divine Hall, he refused to underestimate any one of them. Their natural talents weren't weak, and they were fostered by platinum-rank sects. So, the inheritances and techniques they possessed were definitely the best in the prefecture. So, not to mention a genius, even an ordinary person would attain extraordinary accomplishments while supported by such resources. Thinking like that is for the best. Taoist Gu nodded, and then he waved his right hand and the Herculean sword appeared before Yang Yi. There was a dragon marking on the Herculean sword now. The head of the dragon resided at the hilt of the sword. The claws were below the hilt, and the dragon's body covered the entire blade. The dragon was absolutely lifelike, and it simply seemed like a living dragon. Taoist Gu said, "I've planted that dragon within the sword, so it's much stronger than before, but it's also much heavier. To be honest, I'm afraid that only high-rank half-saints of the demon race are capable of swinging it freely." Yang Yi took the Herculean sword's hilt, and he immediately felt his hand being dragged down by its weight. He took a deep breath and grabbed its hilt with both hands, and then the profound energy within him surged madly towards his hands before he suddenly lifted it up and slashed. Bang! The powerful force it created shook the space before Yang Yi, while cracks started spreading incessantly towards the surroundings. It was an extremely shocking sight. However, Yang Ye's figure bent forward, and he started gasping incessantly for breath. Even a half-saint would be crushed alive if you're able to catch that half-saint off guard. There was a trace of a serious expression in Taoist Gu's eyes. Unfortunately, even your physical strength isn't sufficient to swing it freely. His physical strength should be sufficient. He's just not really used to it. Jian Wuchen suddenly spoke. Give him some time and he should be able to use it normally. Yang Yi suddenly said, I'm going into closed-door cultivation for some time. He didn't just want to get accustomed to the Herculean sword. He intended to get accustomed to his newly improved sword intent as well. Moreover, he intended to cultivate the divine fist of destruction he obtained from the Tao Order's founding ancestor. After all, it was an absolutely terrifying technique, so he had to master it. Besides that, he had to improve his cultivation as well and attain the high rank of the monarch rank at the very least. Most importantly, he had to devour even more extreme-grade energy stones and send violet profound energy to the tiny vortex. If he was able to feed it well, then perhaps it might send him the stone of suppression, and it would be even better if it could send Su Qingshi and the others out instead. While Yang Yi was in closed-door cultivation, Taoist Gu had suddenly obtained a wedding invitation, and it was from Sky Divine Hall. A year from now, the young hall master of Sky Divine Hall, Lu Qianxiao, would be marrying Sky Divine Hall's Mu Hanshan, and Nanjing, and the daughter of the Sky Fox Demon King, Yun Hentian. Besides the wedding invitation, there was another invitation for battle. The invitation was from Lu Qianxiao, and its content was, Geniuses of Pine Prefecture, can anyone fight me? Geniuses of Pine Prefecture, can anyone fight me? As soon as these words were spread, the entire prefecture could be said to be seething. Because Luo Qianxiao hadn't just looked down upon Lu Wan'er, the Void Lord, Shangguan Yunhai, and Qing Daofu, who were equally famous as him. He'd even looked down upon all the geniuses of the prefecture. Countless geniuses started traveling towards Sky Divine Hall in the south. Surprisingly, Lu Wan'er, Shangguan Yunhai, Qing Daofu, and the Void Lord didn't respond to Lu Qianxiao's provocation. While the four of them hadn't responded, their respective sects had, and they'd said that they would send their members to attend. This time, many people seethed with excitement. Because besides sending those who were equally famous to Lu Qianxiao, it was utterly impossible for the other sects to send anyone else. After all, if the representatives they sent were weak, then they might make an embarrassment of their sects. So, it was a battle of the 5 great geniuses. Just hearing about it was enough to make one's blood boil. So, countless cultivators started traveling towards Sky Divine Hall, as they hoped to witness the grand battle between the most monstrous geniuses of Pine Prefecture, the ancient sword school. At the top of a mountain, Yang Yi and Lu Wanner were taking a slow stroll through an ocean of flowers. Both of them were walking quite slowly through the boundless flowers, and it was a scene that was beyond beautiful. "He wants to be the best," Lu Wanner spoke abruptly. "Throughout the history of Pine Prefecture, no one in the younger generation has dared to speak about being the best, because there are countless monstrous geniuses throughout the prefecture, and there were those who were renowned and those who weren't. Especially those who weren't renowned, those monstrous geniuses who didn't care about reputation were usually much more terrifying. We understand that principle, and so does he, and he's definitely clearly aware that both he and Sky Divine Hall would become the laughingstock of the prefecture if he failed. However, he still issued that invitation. Since he dared to challenge all the geniuses of the prefecture, I presume he's absolutely confident in his ability." Yang Yi stopped moving. He turned to look at Lu Wanner before he said, "Wanner, you actually came to see me today just because you were afraid that I would attack Sky Divine Hall right now, right?" Lu Wanner pondered deeply for a short while before she spoke. "In my opinion, there is nothing you dare not do. Lu Xianxia is very arrogant and haughty, but I think that his arrogance and haughtiness are just child's play when compared to you." She hadn't forgotten how Yang Yi was on Profounder Continent. At that time, he was a complete and utter madman. He killed members of the hallowed grounds, fought the defiant Profounders. Not to mention the hallowed grounds. How fearsome were the defiant Profounders. If they were able to recover their strengths, then not to mention Pine Prefecture, even the entire Radiance dimension might have been in danger. The reason the defiant Profounders had lost all those years ago wasn't entirely because they weren't united. It was also because the Radiant dimension had gotten outside help. In short, if Yang Yi was infuriated, then not to mention attacking Sky Divine Hall, he would even dare to pierce a hole through the heavens. Yang Yi grinned and said, "You feel I'm very arrogant and haughty?" She shook her head and said, "There are two sides to you, an evil side and a kind side, and which side you display depends on how others treat you. If others don't offend you, then you usually don't offend anyone as well. But once someone does offend you, then you transform into a devil that fears nothing." Yang Yi took a deep breath and looked into the distance as he said, "Wanner, you have to realize that good people don't survive for long in this world. I've always been like this. I don't offend others, but I kill if I'm offended. But don't worry, I won't act rashly for now. My goal now isn't to attack Sky Divine Hall, but to work hard on improving my strength. Because I'll only be able to kill them with sufficient strength. Otherwise, I'll be killed instead." Lu Wanner spoke abruptly. "I'll accompany you there when the time comes." Yang Yi smiled. "I couldn't ask for anything better." Lu Wanner suddenly said, "Do you know what the inheritance you gave me was?" He replied, "I'm quite curious about that. How strong was the second master of the sword spirit?" Yang Yi didn't really know the answer to that question. In any case, he was very strong, extremely strong. At the very least, he wasn't inferior to the sword master of the ancient sword school. Moreover, he who held the sword precursor in his hand might have even been able to slaughter experts above the Saint realm. "Watch!" As soon as she finished speaking, Lu Wanner took a step forward, and then she slowly grasped the hilt of the sword on her waist. After that, a strange scene appeared before Yang Ye's eyes. Lu Wanner's soul suddenly left her body and arrived above her head. At the same time, her soul maintained the same posture as her body. Slash! Her voice suddenly resounded, and then both her body and soul held her sword and slashed down with it. The attack didn't make a single sound, but a mountain in the distance, which was over 3 kilometers tall and 500 m wide, had been split at the center. A huge rift had appeared at its center, and both sides of the rift were smooth like a mirror. Yang Ye's pupils constricted slightly while a solemn expression appeared in his eyes. Lu Wanner's soul returned to her body, and then she walked over to Yang Yi before she said, "It's very formidable, and it's very formidable even in the ancient sword school. It stresses upon the perfect fusion of body and soul. It utilizes the joint strength of the body and soul, the energy of the world, and the characteristics of third-level heaven rank sword intent. So, not only is it very strong, it is able to conceal its fluctuations as well. I once utilized it to kill a high-rank half-saint. Yang Yi pondered for a short while before he grinned and subconsciously moved his hand towards Lu Wanner's head. However, he seemed to have thought of something and withdrew his hand. I know that you want to remind me of the gap between Lu Qianxiao and me. Don't worry, I won't go fight him to the death right now. Lu Wanner suddenly said. What are you afraid of? Yang Yi was bewildered. Huh. She looked him in the eyes and said, if you want to, then do it. I never said you couldn't. Yang Yi was slightly stunned, and then he felt quite embarrassed. He treated her as his younger sister in the past, just like little Yao and Bauer. So it was a habit for him to rub their heads, and it was naturally a habit he'd formed because of little Yao. However, Lu Wanner was all grown up now, so it wasn't suitable for him to continue doing the same. Lu Wanner continued. Or perhaps you don't dare to because you think that I'm stronger than you now? Yang Yi chuckled, and then he stretched out his hand and rubbed her head. What about now? A slight smile appeared on the corners of her mouth. You know, having my head rubbed by you makes me feel doted upon and safe. I really like that feeling. All right, I won't disturb you anymore. Quickly continue with your cultivation. I'm still waiting for you to attain the half-saint realm, so I can have a real battle with you. As soon as she finished speaking, Lu Wanner waved her hand and transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the horizon. Yang Yi stood there and stared blankly for a long time after she left, and then he finally returned to his cultivation room. His cultivation room was very large, and it was simply stretched too far for the eye to take in completely. Besides that, it was covered in a barrier that was set up by a saint, so it could be said to be solid as a fortress. So, not to mention him, even the joint forces of 10 high-rank half-saints wouldn't be able to shake the barrier. Yang Yi immediately withdrew 1,000,000 extreme-grade energy stones and placed them within the room, and then he ignited them. After all, he didn't have to swallow them anymore. As soon as those energy stones were transformed into energy, all of it flowed into him, transformed into violet profound energy, and then surged into the tiny vortex. Presently, the tiny vortex could absorb energy on its own. So, after he withdrew those energy stones and ignited them, he'd paid no further attention to the tiny vortex and started to cultivate the divine fist of destruction instead. The divine fist of destruction placed a huge demand on his physical strength. Fortunately, he was barely able to meet the conditions. As for the 9 rebirth technique, he'd started cultivating it as well for no other reason than because his strength would multiply upon attaining the half-saint realm. He wasn't able to refuse such temptation. As for the subsequent stages of the technique, he didn't intend to cultivate them, of course. What a joke! He detested the suffering he would have to endure if he had to cultivate all over again. Just like that, Yang Yi absorbed the energy from the energy stones while cultivating both the 9 rebirth technique and the divine fist of destruction. Moreover, he even used the spare time he had to get accustomed to the Herculean sword. A month passed by without a sound. Yang Yi had exhausted 2,000,000 extreme-grade energy stones during this period, but there was still no movement from the tiny vortex, nor did it release anything from within it. Yang Yi was rendered quite speechless by this outcome. However, he had no choice but to continue exhausting more energy stones. While there had been no movement from the tiny vortex, Yang Yi had made quite a bit of progress when it came to the divine fist of destruction and the Herculean sword. Because the divine fist of destruction technique which the Tao Order's founding ancestor had planted within his mind wasn't just detailed, it even had the founding ancestor's annotations. So it wasn't difficult to cultivate at all. After a period of repeated practice, he was able to barely execute it now. Of course, it was naturally not very powerful, but it wasn't weak as well. At the very least, it was stronger than 20 overlapped heaven rens, 20 overlapped heaven rens that were enhanced by 3rd-level heaven rank sword intent. Besides the divine fist of destruction, he'd gotten quite accustomed to utilizing the Herculean sword now. Not only did he have no need of using 2 hands to hold it anymore, he could swing it at least 10 times in a breath of time. If it was an ordinary sword, then even swinging it 1,000 times in a breath of time wouldn't be a problem. However, it was extraordinary to be able to swing the Herculean sword 10 times in a breath of time. If the Herculean sword was placed atop an Exalt Realm expert, then it would be absolutely capable of crushing an Exalt Realm expert alive. It was even to the extent that some Monarch Realm experts couldn't endure its weight. As for the 9 rebirth technique, it wasn't difficult at all. Actually, it should be said that the first stage wasn't difficult at all. It was only very painful to cultivate, and it placed huge demands on the strength of one's physical body. But Xianxia's body fully conformed to its requirements for the first stage. As for the pain, he'd suffered more than enough throughout his life, so that little bit of pain he experienced was really nothing to him. Now, all he had to do was wait until he attained the half-saint realm. Time passed slowly, and another month passed by. He'd attained 60 or 70% mastery of the Divine Fist of Destruction technique, and it could be used in battle now. As for the Herculean sword, he could swing it around 30 times in a breath of time. In any case, if he couldn't crush his opponent to death within 30 moves, then he had to run because his strength would be exhausted. The only thing that made him feel depressed was that there was still no movement from the tiny vortex after he exhausted all the extreme-grade energy stones he possessed. Xianxia laughed bitterly and was just about to give up. However, the tiny vortex suddenly started revolving, and then a young girl appeared before Xianxia. Xianxia was stunned when he saw her, because he'd never seen her in his life. However, she felt extraordinarily familiar to him. The girl was quite young at around the age of 16. Her skin was snow-white, and while she seemed to be quite young and immature, she was extremely beautiful. She wore a violet-colored dress while a violet and gold sash was tied tightly around her waist, causing her slender and delicate figure to be vividly displayed. However, even though she seemed young, she possessed an elegant and dignified aura. Xianxia was just about to speak when she suddenly embraced him, and then immediately started crying. The girl grew more and more agitated as she cried, and her tears simply flowed down like rivers that completely drenched Xianxia's clothes. Xianxia was completely stunned. A long time passed before he lightly tapped the crying girl and said, Who are you?" The young girl raised her head, and she seemed quite pitiable while her long eyelashes had pearls of tears on them. It was truly a pitiable sight. She suddenly wrapped her arms around Xianxia's head and ceaselessly rubbed her head against his chin. Bang! Xianxia's figure stiffened while his mind simply felt as if it had exploded. A long time passed before he wrapped his arms tightly around her fine waist, as if he wanted to squeeze her into himself. Zir! You're Zir, you're Zir. The young girl before him was the little fellow, Zir. Of course, she'd taken human form right now. The most unforgettable person in his lifetime was definitely Zir, because she'd gone through thick and thin with him until now, and the relationship they had was simply indescribable with words. The two of them just embraced each other for around an hour before they finally split apart. Xianxia stretched out his hand and placed it on Zir's face, and he gently wiped off her tears as he asked, Are all of them fine? Zir nodded, and then she embraced Xianxia and spoke softly. Something suddenly changed in the world within the tiny vortex that day. A mysterious force sealed the world within the tiny vortex, and so we were unable to gain contact with the outside world. Do you know how worried about you we were? We were truly worried, truly very worried. Xianxia felt quite moved and said, I was in the exact same state. Fortunately, we're all fine, right? Since you were able to come out from there, then can Xianxia and the others be able to do the same? She shook his head in response. That mysterious force hasn't dispersed completely, but it's gradually vanished because a huge amount of violet energy entered the world in Pagoda, and that mysterious force started to weaken. The reason I was able to come out was because everyone joined forces to help me while I possessed extremely powerful spatial techniques. That was why I was able to pierce through the mysterious force. They'll only be able to come out if that mysterious force weakens further. A mysterious force? Xianxia frowned. How could another force exist within the primordial pagoda? It was probably created by the pagoda. Zir continued. The primordial pagoda was severely threatened because you executed an extremely powerful sword technique, so it released that mysterious energy to seal off the world within the pagoda. Unfortunately, it still suffered a heavy injury, and it's utterly incapable of removing the seal on itself in its current state. So, That's why it has been constantly absorbing violet energy. Because it'll only be able to remove that energy once it has recovered from its injuries. The expression on Xianxia's face eased up slightly when he heard this. Because it would be fine so long as someone hadn't entered his body by force and sealed the primordial pagoda. After all, it would truly be terrifying if that was the case. Fortunately, it was only the primordial pagoda's own doing, and that meant that it would recover if he supplied sufficient extreme-grade energy stones to it. When he thought up to this point, the worries in Xianxia's heart had finally eased up. He sized up Zier, and there was a trace of shock in his eyes. Zier, you've attained the high rank of the half-saint realm. I just did. Zier grinned. It was the reason why I was able to leave the pagoda. My cultivation isn't very stable right now, so I have to consolidate it for some time. Suddenly, she frowned, and then her hands shot straight beneath Xianxia's clothes. Bang! A muffled bang resounded as Zier took a few steps back, and then two women appeared in front of Xianxia. It was the two snakes who called themselves Qing and Hong. Which demon king do you belong to? Hong stared fixedly at Zier while there was a trace of vigilance and hostility in her eyes. Me! Xianxia suddenly walked over to Zier and said, Are you all right? Zier shook her head and said, Why are there two snakes with you? That's a long story. I'll tell it to you in the future. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around to gaze at Qing and Hong. There was a trace of heaviness and vigilance in his eyes. While they were high-rank half-saints just like Zier, their strengths clearly far surpassed Zier. But it made sense because they were trying to charge into the saint realm that day. While they were high-rank half-saints, they were absolutely not ordinary high-rank half-saints. Xianxia pondered deeply for a moment and said, I was in the wrong for causing both of you to be struck by the wrath of the heavens. But even if your strengths haven't recovered completely, the nourishment of my violet profound energy should have restored around 80 or 90% of your strength. So, both of you can leave now. He'd thought for a moment and decided to stay away from these women. Especially Hong because it was really dangerous to keep her by his side. Are you trying to make us leave? Hong's face turned slightly gloomy while there was a wisp of hostility in her eyes. Xianxia replied, I can't do anything about it if you intend to take it in that way. Hong spoke indifferently. I refuse. Xianxia was slightly stunned and said, You're trying to hang on to me now? Meanwhile, Qing walked over to Xianxia and said, Even though we've recovered quite a bit, we still haven't recovered fully. We have to rely on your profound energy to completely recover our strength. Otherwise, it's very likely that we would have to exhaust over 100 years to recover. So, allow us to stay by your side. All right? We'll help you in battle. Xianxia remained silent for a long time before he said, How confident are you in your ability to attain the Saint Realm? If you use your violet profound energy to help us, then we are at least 40% confident. Qing's eyes flickered with excitement. Xianxia frowned. Only 40? Do you think it's that easy? Hong spoke angrily. 40% is considered to be very high. After all, countless people aren't even 10% confident in their chances of success. Xianxia disregarded Hong and gazed at Qing as he spoke. Both of you can stay, but you have to agree to a condition of mine. You have to help me do 3 things if you're able to attain the Saint Realm. All right? Why should we? Qing hadn't even spoken when Hong spoke before her. After all, both of you can leave right now. Xianxia immediately interrupted her. You! Hong was furious, and she glared angrily at Xianxia. Trust me, I'll swallow you alive right now. All I need is a moment to send out a transmission, and at least 5 saints would be here in an instant. Xianxia gazed coldly at Hong as he spoke. After all, it was the ancient sword school's territory, so he really could make the experts of the sword school come here if he wanted. Actually, it could be said that the saints of the sword school already had their attention focused here. Hong intended to say something in response, but Qing stopped her and said, We agree. If we can attain the Saint Realm, then we'll definitely help you do 3 things. However, I hope you'll lend us a hand when we are charging into the Saint Realm. Xianxia replied, Of course. Hong suddenly said, Aren't you afraid that we would go back on our word? Xianxia grinned. Demon beasts are usually quite trustworthy. Since you've agreed, then both of you should agree to my requests if they aren't too difficult for the two of you. Hong glanced at Yang Yi and grunted coldly. After knowing you for so long, it's the first time you spoke something proper. As soon as she finished speaking, both she and Qing transformed into fine and tiny snakes that entered Yang Ye's clothes. I have to consolidate my cultivation, so you can't disturb me during this period. As soon as she finished speaking, Zir immediately returned to her original form, and a violet mink descended onto Yang Ye's shoulder. Kid, come to the hall. Meanwhile, Taoist Gu's voice suddenly resounded in Yang Ye's mind. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to arrive at the hall. Compared to the last time, there were much fewer people here. There were only around 10 here. Jian Wuchen sat at the seat of the host, and Taoist Gu was by his side. There's something which is good news for you, but I still intend to ask about your opinion on the matter. Jian Wuchen continued. The Dean of the Ocean of Clouds Academy wants to employ you as an instructor of the academy. Are you willing to take the job? Yang Ye's brows knit slightly together. An instructor? Jian Wuchen nodded in response. Kid, if you agree, then you'll be the second youth instructor in the history of the Ocean of Clouds Academy. Yang Yi asked, would I gain anything from it? Jian Wuchen shook his head. There are benefits. You'll get 100,000 extreme-grade energy stones every single month. Besides that, you can enter the Academy's Scripture Reserve. If you have the ability, you can even enter its Combat Technique Pavilion and Cultivation Technique Pavilion. Don't underestimate these pavilions. If one were to name a power with the best cultivation and combat techniques throughout the prefecture, then it would definitely be the Ocean of Clouds Academy. Because many techniques there come from the central divine prefecture. When he spoke up to this point, Jian Wuchen stood up and said, I know that you might not value all of that, but I still hope that you'll agree. Yang Yi asked, why? Jian Wuchen replied, you killed many disciples of the academy. While its higher-ups have stopped the others from acting, there are still many within the academy who are disgruntled and displeased. So, many disciples from our sword school are suffering in the academy. If you are to take the position, then it'll be a very good opportunity to resolve the enmity between our sword school and the academy. Yang Yi said, all right. Jian Wuchen grinned and said, remember that you must try your best to keep a low profile when you deal with others and only display your ability when accomplishing tasks for the academy. Understand? You're afraid that I would cause trouble there, right? Yang Yi rolled his eyes and said, actually, I've always won people over with virtue. Fuck off. Win others over with virtue. Jian Wuchen and the others shook their heads. After all, if Yang Yi won people over with virtue, then would anyone who did that even exist in this world? They had no knowledge of Yang Ye's past. But could anything Yang Yi did in Pine Prefecture be considered as trying to win others over with virtue? If those fellows whom he killed knew that he considered that to be winning them over with virtue, then one could only wonder if they would rise up from the dead. Yang Yi suddenly asked, why do they want me to be an instructor there? While there wasn't any deep enmity between him and the Ocean of Clouds Academy, they could absolutely not be said to have a friendly relationship. After all, he'd killed numerous disciples of the academy. To a certain extent, he'd slapped the academy in the face. Jian Wuchen remained silent for a while before he said, perhaps it's related to White Deer Academy. No matter what, it's absolutely beneficial to you and isn't disadvantageous at all. If that old geezer has any requests of you, then don't hold back at all and extort him for everything you can. Yang Yi was at a loss for words. The pagoda of sword intent is gone. Suddenly, an old man appeared in front of Yang Yi. Yang Yi knew the old man because it was that fellow Elder Xiao who said that Yang Yi was one who loved to cause trouble. The corners of Yang Ye's eyes twitched. Is he trying to denounce me now? While he didn't know Elder Xiao's exact status in the sword school, he had no doubt that it was absolutely not low, because even Jian Wuchen was rather respectful towards Elder Xiao. From now onward, it'll be countless times more difficult for the disciples of our sword school to improve their sword intent. Elder Xiao continued with a slightly gloomy tone, and it even carried a trace of faint rage. Jian Wuchen was about to speak, but Elder Xiao gazed at Yang Yi and said, "You did it, right? It was impossible to lie about." So Yang Yi nodded like a man and said, "Indeed." When he spoke up to this point, he gazed at Taoist Gu and said, "Master said that I could devour them as I pleased if I had the ability to do so. After all, this matter was quite serious, so he couldn't bear the responsibility for it on his own. So, he'd hastily dragged Taoist Gu down into it." The corners of Taoist Gu's mouth twitched, and then he gazed at Jian Wuchen and said, "The sword master is aware of this as well. What a joke. Even he wasn't able to bear the responsibility for this. After all, the pagoda of sword intent was a paradise of cultivation for the disciples of the sword school. Now that it had been destroyed, there were definitely countless who were filled with resentment, and that even included those old fellows of the sword school. In any case, he didn't want to become the common enemy of the entire sword school. Jian Wuchen glanced at Yang Yi and Taoist Gu before he spoke. "I'm indeed aware of this, right? The founding ancestor is aware as well. So, we'll wait for the founding ancestor's reply before we decide what is to be done." Everyone here rolled their eyes when they heard this. All of these three fellows are masters at pushing away the responsibility to others. Elder Xiao glanced at Jian Wuchen and said, "Swordmaster, there's no need for that. Actually, I was quite surprised that he could devour all the sword intent there. Now that it has already come to this, I don't intend to blame anyone. After all, he's a disciple of our sword school at any rate. But it's hardly justifiable to just give it to him like that, right?" Jian Wuchen asked, "Elder Xiao, then what do you think we should do? There are less than 3 years to the next martial rankings." Elder Xiao glanced at Yang Yi and continued, "We can forget this matter if he's able to fight his way into the top 30. If he can't, then it proves that giving the sword intent to him was a waste. So, I hope that Swordmaster will punish him according to the rules of the sword school." Jian Wuchen pondered deeply for a moment before he gazed at Yang Yi and said, "What do you think? Only the top 30? Yang Yi waved his hand and said, "It's only the top 30. It's not a problem." To be honest, after he absorbed all the sword intent and found out about its significance to the sword school, he felt quite guilty in his heart. After all, countless disciples needed it to improve their sword intent. Now that he'd absorbed it all, it represented that it would be countless times more difficult for them to improve their sword intent from now on. So, he'd immediately agreed when Elder Xiao raised such a requirement. While he didn't know what the martial rankings was, he felt that the top 30 shouldn't be a problem for him. Only the top 30? The corners of Elder Xiao's mouth twitched. He took a deep breath and said, "Good. Very good. Remember what you've said. Don't blame me for being merciless if you fail. Elder Xiao, you seem to not hold any confidence in me." Yang Yi continued, "Since it's like that, why don't we make a bet? Do you think that I would fear you? Let's bet if you want." Elder Xiao spoke indifferently. Yang Yi grinned. "How about this? If I'm able to ascend that rankings you speak of, then Elder Xiao must support me no matter what I do. All right?" The old man before him was definitely an extraordinary expert that might even be on par with Jian Wuchen. If he could get the old man to back him up, then it would be absolutely good news for him. Elder Xiao glanced at Yang Yi and said, "If you're able to fight your way into the top 30, then I'll support you until the end even if you offend a diamond rank power. However, if you fail, then I'll extract your sword intent and return it to the pagoda of sword intent." As soon as he finished speaking, Elder Xiao's figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After that, the other elders gazed at Yang Yi and shook their heads. Yang Yi was stunned. He gazed at Jian Wuchen and said, "Is it very difficult?" Jian Wuchen spoke flatly, "It isn't very difficult. It's just open to saints as well." Yang Ye's face stiffened. What a joke. Even saints could participate. Was I a little too full of myself when I said that I could when I only have 3 years? Don't worry. Old fellows like us are naturally unable to join. Taoist Gu consoled him. Saints can participate indeed. However, it's only limited to those innate saints. In other words, only saints below the age of 30 are allowed to participate. Not to mention our prefecture, there are very few of such existences even in the central divine prefecture. So, you have a very good chance. Yang Yi laughed bitterly and said, I hope so. Meanwhile, a golden piece of paper appeared before him while Jian Wuchen's voice resounded. This is your letter of appointment. Head to the academy with this and you can take up your new position there. Yang Ye's gaze focused onto the paper, and he saw a row of words there, Outer Court Instructor. The Ocean of Clouds Academy is divided into the Outer Court, Inner Court, and Secret Court. Every single court has 4 classes differentiated by the alphabet from A to D. Practically all the disciples of the Outer Court are at the Exalt realm or below, while the Inner Court is filled with disciples at the Monarch realm to the Half-Saint realm. As for the Secret Court, I don't know the strength of its students because it's the most mysterious and strongest part of the academy, said Jian Wuchen. Yang Yi nodded and said, Should I head there right now? Jian Wuchen grinned. Of course. After all, the academy's outer court is in its recruitment period right now. In other words, your students will be new students. If you head over right now, then you can get to know them in advance. Remember what I said. Keep a low profile there and only display your ability when needed. After all, you represent the sword school now, and you can't allow others to look down on our sword school. Don't worry, while I can't guarantee anything else, I can guarantee that this kid will definitely not allow himself to suffer a loss. Taoist Gu chuckled. Kid, the Ocean of Clouds Academy is filled with experts, so don't get in over your head. Most importantly, don't lose to any disciple of the academy. Otherwise, both you and our sword school will be utterly humiliated. When he spoke up to this point, Taoist Gu flicked a scroll over to Yang Yi and said, This is a map of the prefecture, and the location of the various powers throughout the prefecture are marked on it. Besides that, do you see those red dots? Those red dots mark places that are still very dangerous to you. So don't go court death. All right? Yang Yi took the scroll and sighed with emotion in his heart. This is the benefit of belonging to a sect. Besides having their support and resources, I gain so much more that others aren't able to obtain. Yang Yi held the scroll as he bowed a little to Jian Wuchen and Taoist Gu, and then he left the hall. Jian Wuchen watched Yang Yi walk out before he spoke abruptly. I wonder what he experienced in the past. Did you feel it? While he has joined our sword school, he clearly carries a trace of resistance towards accepting the members of our sword school. Besides that, he does respect us, but there's no fear in him when he faces us. Is he fearless for he is ignorant? Or is it because he has some sort of terrifying trump card? Taoist Gu shook his head and said, No matter what, that kid's character is quite good. Just as he said, so long as we don't betray him, then he won't betray our sword school. That's more than enough. Jian Wuchen spoke softly. Right? Yang Yi didn't head straight for the academy. He went to the Heavenly Sword Peak instead. In a room there, Fan Meng gazed at Yang Yi as she spoke softly. I heard you're going to the Ocean of Clouds Academy. Moreover, Fan Li was by her side. At this moment, both of them weren't considered members of the sword school, and they'd assumed the identity of Yang Ye's family and were staying at his residence within the sword school. Yang Yi nodded and said, Cultivate well here once I've gone there. If you don't know anything or are bullied, you can go seek help from senior brothers Chundong and Wu Yanzhong. All of them think that both my sister and I are yours, so how could they dare to bully us? Fan Meng's voice almost sounded like the buzz of a mosquito, and her face had even turned rosy. It made her seem beautiful and capable of moving the hearts of all men. Fan Li had quite an uncomfortable expression on her face as well. Yang Yi smiled embarrassedly, and then he gazed at Fan Li. Take good care of her, and take good care of yourself. I hope that you'd have attained the Monarch realm and Fan Meng has successfully joined the ancient sword school when we meet again. Fan Li gazed at him and spoke softly. Take care. Yang Yi nodded, and then he walked out of the room. Big sister, let's both marry him, all right? Fan Li was at a loss for words. After he left the Heavenly Sword Peak, Yang Yi transformed into a ray of light and shot towards the academy on his sword. Ocean of Clouds Academy. I'm coming. Yang Ye's voice resounded through the sky. Actually, He didn't intend to continue his closed-door cultivation, even if the Ocean of Clouds Academy hadn't invited him to be an instructor for them. After all, his strength had arrived at a certain level, and it was especially so for his sword techniques and sword intent. So, it was impossible for them to be improved further even if he continued his cultivation. Only live combat could improve his strength now. Of course, the reason he'd agreed was mainly because the enmity between him and the academy had made life difficult for the disciples of the ancient sword school who were at the academy. He was the cause of it, so he had to resolve the conflict between himself and the academy. Besides that, the academy had information related to the Central Divine Prefecture and the entire Radiance dimension. He definitely had to head to the Central Divine Prefecture in the future, so he had to obtain information about it in advance. It would be best if he could find out about the clans related to Elder Mu and Zhuge Shenma. He'd never forgotten what Elder Mu had entrusted him with. Yang Yi had to head to Ocean of Cloud City if he wanted to get to the academy because the academy was situated in the sky above the city. Ocean of Cloud City was very famous in Pine Prefecture because it was the largest city in the prefecture. Besides that, it was the territory of the most mysterious power in the prefecture, the Ocean of Clouds Academy. While the Ocean of Clouds Academy wasn't the strongest platinum rank sect in the prefecture, there was no doubt that its status was the most aloof, and it was the existence which powers didn't want or dare to offend the most. The academy never participated in the battles throughout the prefecture, and it allowed the disciples of all powers to join the academy and learn there. However, they had to obey the rules of the academy while they studied in the academy. Once they graduated, they could choose to stay in the academy or leave. They weren't forced to do anything, and it all depended on themselves. It could be said that the students of the academy were extremely free. So, countless powers were willing to allow their disciples to join the academy. However, the academy's standards of acceptance were quite high. The test eligibility requirement was to attain the Exalt realm before the age of 20, and only after one fulfilled that requirement could one attempt to pass through a string of tests prepared by the academy. The only way to become a student of the academy was to pass those tests. There were towering mountains all around Ocean of Cloud City. The mountain range was called Welkin Wolf Mountain Range, and a well-known demon king resided in the mountain range, the Welkin Wolf Demon King. Amongst the experts of the prefecture, the Welkin Wolf Demon King's strength could definitely be ranked in the top 5. While Welkin Wolf Mountain Range surrounded Ocean of Cloud City, it wasn't enemies with the academy, but it wasn't friendly with the academy either. It should be said that both sides were using each other. The academy used the demon beasts in the mountain range to temper its students, while the demon beasts of the mountain range similarly utilized the students of the academy to temper themselves. Both sides had an unspoken understanding. Yang Yi stopped when he arrived at Welkin Wolf Mountain Range because the sky above the entire mountain range had a mysterious formation covering it. Of course, his strength was sufficient to force his way through, but he'd stopped in the end, because it was a spot on the map that was labeled with a red dot. In other words, it was a dangerous place to him right now. He could have utilized the teleportation formation in the ancient sword school to arrive immediately at Ocean of Cloud City. However, he hadn't because he wanted to see the prefecture. After all, he'd been constantly cultivating throughout his life, and it was especially so once he arrived at the Radiant Dimension. Cultivating for too long was naturally quite boring. So, his current plan was to observe the scenery and enjoy a few days of calmness. As soon as he descended to the ground, Yang Yi swept the surroundings with his gaze, and he noticed that it was covered in endless mountains and huge trees which blotted out the sky. Yang Yi stood silently on the spot for a while, and then he turned his head to glance at the violet mink who was meditating on his shoulder. He grinned, and then his figure flashed into the forest. Yang Yi dashed swiftly all along the way while ceaselessly sensing the auras of the demon beasts in the surroundings. So long as there was a demon beast ahead, then he would choose to go around it because he wasn't here to kill and collect inner cores. Moreover, because of the little fellow, he'd never taken the initiative to kill demon beasts, and he only killed them if they attacked him. There are people here. Suddenly, Yang Yi hurriedly stopped himself. Unfortunately, it was too late because a man and a woman had appeared not too far away within his field of vision. Of course, it was naturally not a problem if they were in a normal state. But the problem was that they weren't. Both of them were completely down their birthday suits, and they were engaging in the most primitive form of exercise. MMM. Oh! Faster! Faster! A wave of delicate gasps resounded incessantly. Suddenly, a soft exclaim resounded while both their bodies twitched as if they'd been shocked by lightning. Yang Yi withdrew his gaze and was about to leave. Meanwhile, the woman suddenly said, "By Feng, he can't be allowed to leave alive." Only now did Yang Yi recall that he'd actually forgotten to conceal his aura. Meanwhile, a strand of sword energy had arrived behind him. Yang Yi moved to the side and dodged it, and then he gazed at the pair who'd worn their clothes now. The man wore a white robe and held a jade-white paper fan in his hand. He seemed quite carefree and handsome. While the woman couldn't compare to Fan Li and the others, she wasn't bad either. She wore a green dress, had a slender figure, and a pretty appearance. Especially now that there was a trace of rosiness after the act lingering on her forehead, it made her seem quite attractive. Both of them were low-rank Exalt Realm cultivators. That was exactly why they dared to attack him, even when they couldn't see through his cultivation. Yang Yi said, "I'm just passing by." The woman spoke gloomily. "You saw something you shouldn't, so you deserve death." The man nodded and was about to attack. However, they suddenly frowned while a robust man and a woman flashed over from afar. "Xiao, Brother Li, I thought something happened to the both of you." The robust man walked over to the woman, and then he stretched out his hand and took hers while concern filled his eyes. The woman by the robust man's side glanced at the woman in a green dress and the white-robed man, but she didn't say a word. "Brother Man Li, we encountered a few spirit realm demon beasts, and that was why we were delayed." While the white-robed man was speaking to the robust man, his gaze was locked on Yang Yi instead, and the intent to warn Yang Yi to not say anything was absolutely obvious. The woman in a green dress glanced at Yang Yi in the same way, and then she pulled her hand away from the robust man's grasp and spoke flatly. "Both Brother Bai and I are at the Exalt Realm, so we would be fine even if we encounter Exalt Realm demon beasts. What are you worried about?" Manly smiled embarrassedly and said, "So long as you're fine. That's all that matters." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to look at Yang Yi and said, "Brother, are you participating in the Academy's test as well?" Yang Yi, who was about to leave, had suddenly stopped moving, and he asked, "The Academy's test?" Manly nodded and smiled. "We're in the middle of the Academy's recruitment test. Brother, aren't you doing the same?" Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment because he hadn't expected the recruitment tests to have begun. In other words, if all of them were to pass the test, then wouldn't they be considered his students? When he thought up to this point, Yang Yi said, "I'm participating in the test as well." Manly smiled when he heard that. "Since it's like that, then why don't you join our group? Staying united is better than being all alone. After all, the Exalt Realm demon beasts in the mountain range are really powerful." The woman in a green dress and the white-robed man revealed slightly gloomy expressions when they heard him, and their gazes towards Yang Yi carried a trace of ghastly killing intent. Yang Yi disregarded them and nodded. He was quite curious about the Academy's test, so he intended to join them and watch. Just like that, Yang Yi became a member of their group. He found out from Man Li that the woman in a green dress was called Tang Xiao, and she was his fiancée. The white-robed man was Tang Xiao's cousin brother, Bai Feng. As for the other woman, her name was Chu Yu, and she was childhood friends with Man Li. Actually, Yang Yi felt that their relationship was quite complicated. However, he didn't want to interfere in their private life, so he just followed them in silence. But even then, Tang Xiao and Bai Feng's killing intent towards him grew stronger and stronger. Their assignment was to hunt and kill 10 Exalt Realm demon beasts and collect the inner cores. Demon beasts were much stronger than humans at the same realm of cultivation, so it was quite difficult for each of them to hunt and kill 10. Besides the 4 of them, there were around 200 others that were taking the test as well. All of them had the same assignment. As for their grades in the test, it was naturally determined by the number of inner cores they returned with. 10 could only be considered as barely passing, and they would only be sent to the D class even if they could enter the outer court. So all of them wanted to kill more demon beasts. However, they were aware of the limits of their strengths, so they could only hunt and kill Exalt Realm demon beasts that were alone. As for those that were in groups of 2 or more, they ran as far as they could from such groups of demon beasts. Biafeng suddenly asked Yang Yi, "Yang, how many Exalt Realm demon beasts have you killed?" Yang Yi hadn't told them his real name. He hadn't done so because he wanted to make them underestimate him and take them by surprise. It was because he wanted to avoid trouble. After all, his name was quite well known throughout the prefecture. Yang Yi glanced indifferently at Biafeng when he heard this and said, "Not many, but it shouldn't be a problem for me to pass." "Is that so?" Biafeng laughed coldly and said, "I'm quite a kind person, so I wanted to remind Brother Yi that since it isn't a problem for you to pass, then it's best to be careful. After all, people are dying in this mountain range at all times." "You're very right." Yang Yi nodded and spoke with agreement. "One really should be cautious, or you wouldn't even know how you died." "Manly, why don't we split up and look for demon beasts?" Tang Xiao spoke abruptly. "We can contact each other if we locate any demon beasts that are alone." Manly hesitated for a moment and said, "Xiao, I'm afraid that you would be in danger." "What are you afraid of? We're all at the Exalt Realm. Even if we lose in battle, we can still escape." Tang Xiao continued, "Moreover, I'll have my cousin brother with me." "What are you afraid of?" Manly glanced at Biafeng and hesitated for a moment before he said, "All right, be careful. Ayu and I will go towards the left with Brother Yi. Both of you can head towards the right. Remember not to attack if you encounter any Exalt Realm demon beasts." Tang Xiao spoke abruptly. "Brother Yi will come with us instead." Manly glanced at Yang Yi and said, "All right." After that, he withdrew a transmission talisman and passed it to Yang Yi. "Brother Yi, please activate this talisman if there's an emergency. I'll definitely get there in less than 3 breaths of time." Yang Yi glanced at the transmission talisman and smiled. "Thank you." Manly nodded, and then it didn't take long for him and Chuyu to vanish from their fields of vision. However, Chuyu took a deep and long glance at Yang Yi, Biafeng, and Tang Xiao before they left. As soon as Manli and Chuyu vanished from their fields of vision, Tang Xiao's figure suddenly flashed over to Yang Yi, and then her fair hand clamped down onto his throat while she spoke ferociously. "Do you want to die?" Bang! As soon as she finished speaking, her figure was blasted flying and smashed through around 10 huge trees before finally crashing to the ground. "You!" Biafeng was shocked. He was just about to say something when he saw something flash before his eyes, and then he felt sharp pain come from his stomach. After that, he was blasted flying as well, and he crashed to the ground by Tang Xiao's side. The 2 of them had just stood up when Yang Yi appeared in front of them again, and then he grabbed both of them by the throat. Both of them were astounded by the sudden turn of events, and they gazed at Yang Yi with horror. After all, even an idiot would have realized that Yang Yi wasn't an ordinary expert. Tang Xiao spoke with a terrified voice. "Who exactly are you?" Yang Yi glanced at them and said, "I'm not interested in paying any attention to that crap between the 2 of you. Understand?" Roar! Suddenly, a huge black wolf jumped out from the forest, and it was extremely huge like a small hill. A ferocious glow flashed through its eyes when it noticed Yang Ye's group, and then it pounced at them. Bang! Tang Xiao and Biafeng hadn't even been able to see what happened before the enormous wolf smashed against the ground and twitched incessantly. This time, their figures couldn't help but start shivering. Because the wolf was at the Exalt Realm. Yang Yi released the 2 of them, and they immediately slumped down to the ground. Meanwhile, Yang Yi said, "Out of consideration for the fact that both of you might become become students of the Ocean of Clouds Academy, I'll let it go this time. I presume both of you won't dare to do this again." While Manly seemed like a pretty good guy, he didn't want to interfere in their private affairs, because he didn't know anything about it. Since he didn't, he naturally had no right to judge them. Moreover, even if he did understand the situation, he didn't want to interfere in something like that. "Who are you?" asked Tang Xiao. This time, her voice wasn't oppressive and aggressive, and it carried extreme fear instead. Do you really want to know? Yang Yi glanced indifferently at her. Tang Xiao seemed to have thought of something when she heard this, and her delicate figure shivered as she quickly said, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Yang Yi was slightly stunned before he felt quite amused. Looks like she's afraid that I would kill her to keep her quiet. Yang Yi was about to say something when he suddenly turned around and looked towards the distance. Show yourself. As soon as he spoke, a man who wore a luxurious robe and was biting on a weed appeared within their fields of vision. The man sized up Yang Yi and the others before his gaze descended onto Yang Yi, and a slightly evil smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. What powerful senses! You immediately noticed me when I arrived. There really are all sorts of experts hidden amongst the people participating in the test. Yang Yi sized up the man and nodded slightly. The man was at the mid-rank of the Exalt realm before the age of 20, and his aura was quite thick and heavy. Obviously, he'd attained his cultivation through his own ability and hard work, and he hadn't relied on medicinal pills or other treasures to improve it by force. Suddenly, the sound of air being torn apart resounded, and then a man who held a spear arrived here. The black-robed man's gaze stopped on the man in a luxurious robe, and then he looked straight at Yang Yi and the others. Don't waste my time. Just hand over all the inner cores you have, and you can avoid suffering while I can avoid wasting my time. Tang Xiao and Bai Feng's expressions changed slightly, and they instinctively moved towards Yang Yi. Yang Yi asked, You can seize them from each other? Of course. The man in a luxurious robe suddenly smiled. Not only must we fight demon beasts on Welkin Wolf Mountain Range, we have to fight the other participants as well. Of course, while we can seize their inner cores, we're not allowed to kill. However, it doesn't matter if we heavily injure others. Yang Yi thought for a moment and nodded. He wasn't against it, nor did he feel disgusted by it. Because it wouldn't just increase the test's difficulty, it would make them compete against each other. Yang Yi moved aside when he thought up to this point, and he said, Go ahead. He naturally refused to interfere, or wouldn't this test be completely meaningless? Tang Xiao and Bai Feng were slightly stunned, and then their expressions became extremely unsightly. Even though the black-robed man was only at the mid-rank of the Exalt realm, his strength definitely far surpassed their own. So, if Yang Yi refused to help, then they would definitely lose. Both of them shot pleading gazes at Yang Yi. Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment and said, He's all alone while there are two of you. If both of you work together and fight him with all your might, then perhaps you'll be able to turn the tables. Surrender or fight. Make the choice yourselves. The black-robed man suddenly pointed at Yang Yi and said, I want yours as well. Yang Yi suddenly stomped his right foot against the ground. Bang! The entire ground shook violently while countless cracks instantly swept through the ground. Moreover, the huge trees in the surroundings were immediately blasted apart and were transformed into bits that sprayed through the air. Yang Yi gazed at the black-robed man and said, Are you sure? The black-robed man gazed at Yang Yi for a while, and then he withdrew his hand and said, I take back what I said. After that, he gazed at Tang Xiao and Bai Feng. Are you going to hand it over, or should I take it? Don't you dare. Suddenly, a furious howl resounded, and then Man Li and Chu Yu arrived here. Man Li walked over to Tang Xiao and protected her behind himself before he glared angrily at the black-robed man. Brother, the test is difficult for us all. Why don't you just spare us? If you have the ability, you can feel free to take mine instead. As soon as he finished speaking, the black-robed man's spear shot forward. Man Li's expression turned grim. A huge hammer appeared in his grasp with a flip of his palm, and he smashed it towards the speak. Bang! A muffled bang resounded. Man Li's figure was pushed backwards by almost 300 m before he finally stopped himself. Moreover, an extremely obvious and scarlet-red crack had appeared at the center of his palm, while blood covered his entire hand. But it didn't take long for Man Li's figure to flash over and stand in front of Tang Xiao again. He used his left hand to hold the hammer this time while he spoke solemnly. Xiao, leave with your cousin brother and Chu Yu. Bai Feng hurriedly nodded when he heard this. Don't worry, brother man. I'll definitely take good care of them. As he spoke, he turned around with the intention of leaving. However, he'd already taken 2 steps when he realized that both Tang Xiao and Chu Yu hadn't moved at all. "Let's go!" he shouted at them. "Why are you so silly?" Tang Xiao suddenly roared furiously at Man Li. "I don't live you at all. Do you realize that?" "I do," Man Li continued. "You like your cousin brother. Then why are you still treating me like this? Do you know that we've already been with each other?" Tang Xiao howled. "I even have his child." Man Li had a trace of pain on his face when he heard this, and he nodded. I know everything. You." Bai Feng gazed at Man Li with astonishment. Obviously, he hadn't expected that Man Li knew about his relationship with Tang Xiao. Tang Xiao was stunned as well because she hadn't expected him to know. Man Li took a deep breath and said, "Xiao, I actually know everything. While I really like you, I know that you don't like me at all. You like your cousin brother. The reason you agreed to our marriage was because you were pressured to do so by your clan. I'm aware of it all. But what can I do about that when I have feelings for you?" When he spoke up to this point, Man Li took another deep breath and turned around to face her. "I asked to be allowed to leave my clan when I left for the academy. In other words, I'm not a member of the Man clan anymore. Since I'm not, then the marriage between us has naturally been annulled. So you're free now." "I'm free," Tang Xiao muttered while seeming to be in a daze, and Bai Feng quickly supported her. Man Li grinned and said, "You're free now." After that, he gazed at Chu Yu, and there was a gentle gaze filled with guilt in his eyes. I'm sorry. I only had Xiao within my eyes for the last few years, and I overlooked you. Give me a chance to make it up to you, all right?" 2 streams of tears instantly rolled down Chu Yu's face when she heard him. Bai Feng wrapped his arms tightly around Xiao as he spoke with excitement. "Xiao, we can finally be together in the open." However, he hadn't noticed that Tang Xiao's gaze was still on Man Li and Chu Yu, who were in each other's arms. A long time passed before she withdrew her gaze and wrapped her arms tightly around Bai Feng. He was her final pillar of support. "Both of you'll be together? That may not necessarily be the case." Suddenly, a voice resounded before a man in an embroidered robe appeared within their fields of vision. The man was handsome, with skin that was fair as jade, red lips, and pearl-white teeth. The other men here were utterly incapable of being compared to him. He was definitely a man that even women might find themselves inferior to. "Lung Yuran," Bai Feng exclaimed when he saw the man. Lung Yuran was from the same area as they were. However, he was from a gold rank power while they were from a silver rank power, so they couldn't be compared at all. Yang Yi glanced at the man. In the end, he glanced at the man's chest before he withdrew his gaze. Lung Yuran's gaze descended onto Tang Xiao as he said, "You're Tang Xiao, right? You might be unaware of it, but your father has betrothed you to me. Of course, I'm not interested in used goods. However, your Tang clan is truly audacious to actually try to unite our clans in marriage with a woman who'd entangled with another man and even has his child." Tang Xiao and Bai Feng's faces instantly turned ghastly pale when they heard this. Lung Yuran laughed coldly. "In the future, the Tang clan and Bai clan will cease to exist. Especially your Bai clan, it'll absolutely have to vanish. Otherwise, others might think that you, Bai Feng, made me, Lung Yuran, wear a green hat." Bai Feng's figure shivered, and he immediately knelt down before Lung Yuran. "Brother Lung, please show mercy. I beg you, Brother Lung. Please show mercy. Show mercy." Lung Yuran continued, "I can." He pointed at Tang Xiao and said, "As a woman, you failed to maintain your purity, engaged in an illicit relationship, and even got pregnant. You truly deserve death. I don't want to kill you as I don't want to dirty my hands. Bai Feng, don't say that I didn't give you a chance. Kill her and I'll let the matter go." Bai Feng's expression turned extremely unsightly, and he said, "Brother Lung, don't even try to bargain with me." Lung Yuran spoke coldly. "If you don't do it, then just wait to witness the annihilation of your Bai clan." Bai Feng's figure trembled. A long time passed before he gazed at Tang Xiao. Tang Xiao was looking at him as well, and her eyes were filled with tender affection and despair. Bai Feng, while we can't live together, let's die together. Bai Feng was visibly struggling for a long time, and then a ferocious expression flashed through his eyes. After that, a dagger appeared in his grasp before he swung it at Tang Xiao's neck while speaking in a savage tone. Bitch! Just die on your own. This scene had exceeded everyone's expectations, including Tang Xiao. A muffled bang resounded when the dagger was about to strike Tang Xiao's throat, and then Bai Feng's figure was blasted flying. Bai Feng crawled up from the ground and gazed with shock at Lung Yuran who'd attacked him. Brother Lung Yu? Lung Yuran glanced indifferently at him and said, Actually, I was lying. The Tang clan hasn't betrothed Tang Xiao to me. Just use that pig brain of yours. The Tang clan is only a silver rank clan. How could it possibly become united in marriage with my Lung clan? Bai Feng roared furiously. How dare you trick me? Lung Yuran replied. So what? Bite me. You. Bai Feng's face flushed red with rage, but he didn't dare flare up. After that, he seemed to have thought of something and gazed at Tang Xiao who had despair covering her face. Xiao, I. Tang Xiao glanced at him with a wisp of ridicule on the corners of her mouth. Men. Meanwhile, Lung Yuran said, Now, I presume you've realized that all he had towards you was desires of the flesh. You're someone who he can abandon at will under certain circumstances or situations of life and death. You gave up on the one who truly loved you and chose someone who didn't even have you in his heart. You are pitiable and sad. Xiao, give me a chance. Bai Feng suddenly walked over to Tang Xiao and wrapped his arms over her shoulders as he said, I realize my mistakes. Please do it out of consideration for our child and allow me to... Hiss. Bai Feng's voice stopped abruptly. He held his throat with both hands while he moved backwards repeatedly, and his eyes were filled with terror and disbelief. Don't worry. I'll coming right now to keep you company. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly swiped the dagger at her own throat. It was so quick and unexpected that Manli and Lung Yuran's expressions changed because they weren't able to stop her in time. However, the dagger in her grasp was transformed into powder when it was just about to strike her throat. Lung Yuran and the others gazed at Yang Yi while a slightly solemn expression filled their eyes. Is it even worth it? Yang Yi continued. It isn't. Not even in the slightest. Once you die, it's your family that'll be hurt. It's very stupid to harm your family for the sake of someone who doesn't even love you. Now, if you still think you have to accompany him in death, then you can slit your own throat. Don't worry, I absolutely won't stop you. Moreover, I'll even beat up anyone who tries to stop you. Yang Yi hadn't intended to interfere in their business, but he felt that he had to interfere now, because they might be his students. While they couldn't be considered to be his students right now, they still might be. He was serious in assuming the position of instructor in the academy. After all, it was related to the enmity between him and the academy, and it was related to the ancient sword school's honor as well. Tang Xiao slumped down to the ground while despair covered her face. Manli seemed slightly unable to bear the sight of it, and he was about to step forward when Chuyu pulled him back. Manli grinned to her, and then he walked over to Tang Xiao. Xiao, you should be aware that you're the hope of your Tang clan. Both your parents hope that you'll be able to join the academy. If you take your own life now, then what would they do? What would your younger brother do? Tang Xiao raised her hand and glanced at him, and then she glanced at Chuyu in the end. She didn't speak a single word, but the intent to die was gone from her eyes. Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly said, Right, no one is a saint, so can anyone avoid making mistakes? If you realize you've made a mistake, then just rectify it. As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi couldn't help but feel stunned. Have I gotten a little too into the role I'm playing? I'm still not an instructor. Yang Yi shook his head and gazed at the black-robed man. Didn't you want to take their inner cores? You can do it now, right? You can beat them up. It's fine as long as you don't kill them. The others here were stunned when they heard this, and they shot strange gazes at Yang Yi. Man Li and Chu Yu instantly became vigilant because they were the weakest amongst the people here. The black-robed man glanced at Man Li's group, and then he shook his head and said, "I'm not in the mood anymore. There's a wolf den not too far away from here, and there are over 20 Exalt Realm wolves there." Meanwhile, Lang Yuran spoke abruptly, "I wonder if the three of you are interested?" The three Lang Yuran spoke of was naturally Yang Yi, the black-robed man, and the man in an embroidered robe. Over 20? The eyes of the man in the embroidered robe lit up. Tisk, tiske. Over 20 inner cores. If I kill a few groups like that, then it would be almost sufficient for me to enter the A class. Yang Yi suddenly asked, "Is it very difficult to enter the A class?" The face of the man in embroidered robes froze when he heard Yang Yi, and then he glanced at Yang Yi yet didn't say a word. Meanwhile, the others glanced at Yang Yi with strange gazes again. Lang Yuran gazed at Yang Yi and said, "Brother, are you not here to take part in the recruitment test?" "I am. Of course I am." Yang Yi hurriedly guaranteed, "I'm an absolutely legit participant." Lang Yuran replied, "Then why do I feel like you don't know much about the academy?" Yang Yi said, "I came from a remote place, so I don't know much about all of that. Please excuse me." "Excuse me." All of them came to a sudden understanding when they heard him, and then Lang Yuran explained, "We have to hunt and kill at least 50 Exalt Realm demon beasts to enter the A class." "Brother, do you think that's a simple goal to accomplish?" Yang Yi spoke instinctively, "It isn't that difficult." Lang Yuran and the others revealed quite unsightly expressions on their faces when they heard him. Only Tang Xiao fully agreed with Yang Yi because the Exalt Realm demon beast from before had been instantly killed by a single punch from Yang Yi. Of course, she didn't dare speak about it, because while the man who stood before her seemed to be completely harmless, she would never forget how he was like when he was angry. Yang Yi noticed that what he said wasn't very suitable as well, so he smiled embarrassedly and said, "I'm saying that it wouldn't be difficult for us to gather around 50 each with our joint forces." Lang Yuran glanced at him and said, "So all of you agree?" "No problem." The man in an embroidered robe replied, "The strength of a single person is too weak in the end. If we join forces, then we'll definitely be able to gain much more than we would have been on our own." The black-robed man said, "I have no problem as well." Manly suddenly said, "Everyone, then we'll be taking our leave." After all, he didn't feel safe at all while being amidst these fellows. As soon as he finished speaking, he gazed at Tang Xiao and said, "Xiao, will you be coming with us, or?" Tang Xiao glanced at Chu Yu and said, "Both of you go on your own. I intend to go with Brother Yi." When she spoke up to this point, she gazed at Yang Yi and the others. "Don't worry, I definitely won't cause trouble for all of you." Lang Yuran pondered deeply for a moment and said, "You can go with us. However, we won't take care of you if you encounter any danger. Moreover, you have to help if you want to get a share of the inner cores. Otherwise, we won't give it to you for nothing." "All right." Tang Xiao hurriedly nodded. "Take care." Man Li and Chu Yu vanished from their fields of vision. "Let's go." Lang Yuran's figure flashed towards the distance once he finished speaking, and the others immediately followed behind him. It didn't take long for them to sense over a dozen powerful auras, and besides the auras of demon beasts, the auras of humans were present there as well. Lang Yuran stopped moving and spoke in a low voice, "We're too late." In the blink of an eye, his eyes lit up as he said, We're just in time." There were two men and a woman locked in intense combat with over a dozen demon beasts there, and the corpses of a few demon beasts were lying on the ground. However, it was clearly quite strenuous for them, and they were completely suppressed by the joint forces of those demon beasts. So not to mention turning the tides of the battle, even escaping was a problem for them. After all, the speed of Exalt Realm demon beasts wasn't inferior to the speed of humans at all. "Let's wait and reap the benefits." The man in an embroidered robe had a slightly evil smile on the corners of his mouth. "Of course." The black-robed man nodded in agreement. Yang Yi didn't speak. The test was cruel from the moment it began, or it should be said to be one where they could use every means at their disposal. While it was quite cruel, Yang Yi had no doubt that those who passed the test in the end would definitely be elites amongst elites. Brothers who are watching from afar, we are friends of Feng Wuchao. We'll definitely reward you heavily if you lend us a hand. A voice suddenly resounded from afar. Feng Wuchao? Yang Ye's brows knit slightly together. He gazed at Lang Yuran and the others, and he noticed that they had slightly unsightly and solemn expressions on their faces. There are many participants in the recruitment test, but only 4 can be considered to be the strongest. Those 4 are Li Maozhen, Yu Wujiao, Mo Xinyu, and Feng Wuchao. Every single one of them is a genius amongst geniuses. Not to mention Exalt Realm Demon Beasts, they are even capable of killing Monarch Realm Demon Beasts. Lang Yuran noticed Yang Ye's bewildered expression and explained. Li Maozhen is here as well? Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment and said, So what does that have to do with us? Lang Yuran rolled his eyes at Yang Yi and said, Do you think Feng Wuchao would let us live if he found out that we didn't just stand by idly, and we even took advantage of the situation? Alas, what bad luck. I thought we'd encountered something good, but I never expected it to be trouble instead. As soon as he finished speaking, Lang Yuran charged towards the group of demon beasts. The black-robed man and the man in an embroidered robe immediately charged over as well. Meanwhile, Yang Yi hesitated for a moment before he followed after them. Once they joined the battle, the situation was instantly turned around, and those demon beasts were killed in a short while. After they finished killing all the demon beasts, the white-robed man who led the group cupped his hands towards Yang Ye's group. Thank you for the assistance. While he was expressing his gratitude, he'd put away all the inner cores of those dead demon beasts into his own pockets. Why are you even thanking them? They were hiding in the shadows, waiting for a chance to take advantage of the situation and reap the benefits. They might have even stabbed us in the back if they hadn't heard us speak of my cousin brother's name. It was the woman who spoke these words. She was around the age of 20 and rather beautiful. However, her face was currently covered in an icy cold expression of ridicule, and she seemed to be angry that Lang Yuran and the others hadn't lent them a hand right away. The faces of the black-robed man and the man in an embroidered robe became gloomy when they heard this. They were about to speak, but Lang Yuran stopped them and said, It's fine. We only lifted a hand. Farewell. As soon as he finished speaking, Lang Yuran turned around and led them away. Good riddance. The white-robed man who led the group grinned. Suddenly, the woman said, Wait! Lang Yuran and the others stopped before turning around to gaze at her. She pointed at the violet mink who had its paws around Yang Ye's neck while it slept soundly and said, All of you can leave, but leave that little fellow behind. Lang Yuran and the others gazed at Yang Yi. Yang Yi shook his head and said, No, she prefers to be with me. She suddenly walked towards Yang Yi while coldness filled her eyes. You should feel honored that I'm asking for her from you. Don't act like that, all right? Yang Yi continued. They told me that I should keep a low profile. I'll be in a really difficult position if you insist on acting like this. She stopped moving and said, I've changed my mind. Yang Yi smiled. That's right. However, she continued, Not only must you give me that little fellow, all of you must hand over the inner cores in your possessions. Yang Ye's smile froze on his face.